Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people,
which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Well, hello and welcome back to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I'm really glad to be with you here today. I feel like preparing for this episode and then going in to record this episode, I'm just really excited for what's to come. It's been a little bit since I've been able to get my head on straight when it comes to this podcast. And actually today I'm going to be sharing what I'm calling the real, raw, and relatable behind the scenes of our surgery and recovery. Anyhow, it's been a hot minute since I feel like I've been able to really step back and to kind of set a vision for where we're going and for what I want to share with this community. The first thing I want to share before we get into the content of this episode is an announcement I have. I'm a little scared to announce it actually, because in announcing it, it's basically committing to it. And this is something that I have had on my mind for a while, probably 6 months, maybe more. And it's been one of those things where I have a desire, and yet what gets in the way are fears of what will happen and if I might not be able to fulfill on my promises and all of that kind of stuff. Anyhow, maybe I shouldn't disclose so much. However, are you guys ready to know what the announcement is? I hope you're dying with anticipation. Well, drum roll. That was pretty bad, but we're going to go with that. And we are opening a podcast community group. So this is going to be free. And this is going to be an opportunity for you to engage, not just with me, but with the community. And I'm really excited about this because from the get-go, my intention, my vision for this podcast was that it was not just a podcast, but actually a community, a place of belonging, a place where moms could feel heard and understood. And it's a little hard to do that when it's just a podcast, when it's just podcasting is actually a rather one-way conversation. And as you know, you cannot speak back to me unless you interact. And when you do, by the way, it's so much fun. So what I'm going to do in this group is I'm going to open it up on a platform other than Facebook. I know. Facebook's easy. We all have it. And it's very distracting, I find. And so I use a platform, the name of it's called Circle, and it operates basically just like Facebook, except for it doesn't have ads and it doesn't track all your stuff, and which I don't really care about. Bring on the ads. They're quite helpful. Thank you. Really, I like it because I have a higher degree of control over how you see information and really what happens in the group, and also a better variety of tools to create the community. So that's why we're using that. And it's going to be a place where I bring on the guests from the podcast so we can actually have an interactive conversation where instead of just you getting to hear their story, maybe you heard their story on the episode and you have some follow-up questions. You have some things you want to talk about. You want to dive deeper in a certain area. Well, this can be a platform where we can do that. Additionally, my vision is to be able to kind of take the podcasts, it's almost like taking them off the shelf and applying them. It's a place where we can discuss what we heard, what we became aware of in the episode, and really kind of share how it's impacted us, what we might be struggling with, and where we can collaboratively, as a community, step forward and hold each other. It's almost like, actually this last week in my group coaching program, the word sisterhood came up as one of the moms was describing her new relationship with a mom, a NICU mom, where she was kind of mentoring this mom. She described it as kind of a sisterhood. I think those were the words she heard. Maybe she didn't use those words. Maybe I interpreted what she said and said sisterhood. Regardless, I was like, oh, I love that. I love that this is almost like this. We have this common bond now as moms. And so this group community is really around that common bond of holding one another as sister and as fellow comrade in this life. So it'll be a place where we can have conversations. It'll be a place where I will host group coaching calls. I'm not going to promise I'm going to do these with a high degree of frequency. Obviously, it's free. But I do want it to be a place where you can come and taste and see and find benefit and find community. So it's going to be a community of moms like you, of moms that are up against some real challenges and want more. They want to kind of step into the challenge, accept it as the reality, kind of be in the conversation where they are shifting from that powerless, helpless feeling to taking back the power in their lives and kind of finding themselves again, finding their way again. So that's this community. And it's going to be, I think, many special needs moms groups are kind of like, oh, what should I do about this child's medication? And, everyone can kind of provide input, which is valuable. That's just not this group. So this group is going to be very specifically around you, just like this podcast. So it's not going to be the group where you can say, hey, moms, tell me about what I should do about X for my child. It's going to be a group where it says, hey, moms, I'm really struggling with this for myself. I'm really struggling with anxiety. What do you think? Something like that. Okay? See the difference? It's slight, but it's very powerful. With that said, we're going to get into the bulk of the episode. Some of this might have elements of recap from previous episodes. Honestly, I can't remember exactly what I shared before and what I didn't. And I know I shared parts and pieces of the story. And I'm not going to worry too much about that in this episode because, first off, if you're new here, welcome. And it doesn't matter if I shared it before. You still need to have the complete story now. So what I want to do here is I'm kind of doing, like I said, this is the real, raw, and relatable behind the scenes of our surgery and recovery. Now is the time to step back and to look at the whole process, the whole experience. And I want to debrief it for you. I kind of want to do a post-game recap and look at it, open it up to you a little bit so that you can see all the different parts and pieces, share the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that, one, you're going to relate to it, but two, I hope it to be a resource either now or in the future. It might not be an episode that's immediately applicable. However, it will be an episode that you can go back to if you're in an experience where you're finding that you're up against a unforeseen or even maybe just a challenging season. I think it's going to be a great resource. So I want to start with that this whole new diagnosis started the very end of August for us. So we previously had done a brain scan every year to check for recurrence for my son's tumor. Obviously, we knew that there would be some possibility of recurrence since we were doing the scans, and we had faithfully done them for 10 years and had no recurrence. Actually, this was his 10-year anniversary. And so my expectation that we were going to continue to get clean scans was quite high. I was pretty confident. It really wasn't in my space at all, the possibility that he could have recurrence. Now, I knew it could be, but it wasn't really something that I put a lot of thought into or energy into is a better way of saying it. So the moment that I found out, I was totally blindsided. And I won't go into the story of exactly how I found out, but it was, I'll tell you briefly. I found out via an email of the radiology report. So it was very confusing language and also so not how I was expecting to be delivered the information that my son did have recurrence. It wasn't obviously intentional on the doctor's part. I was just stunned would be an accurate word for it. Shocked, devastated, all very accurate. And because this news came, I think it was about 2 weeks before my children were due to go back to school to start the fall school year. First time going back to school after being shut down basically all year previous, obviously due to COVID. And it wasn't the right time to just go right ahead and tell these kids, all of my kids, I have 4 children, all of them about this really big news. So initially, we kept this information to ourselves. My husband and I kept it to ourselves. And we told a minimal amount of family and friends. Really, obviously, I needed to keep the circle quite small because I didn't want the news to kind of accidentally come around to one of my children before we had had the chance to share the news with them. And so in this initial part, what I noticed is obviously a lot of thinking about it. It was a lot of internal processing, really trying to make sense of it. Trying for me to fix the problem in my mind, to kind of come to a place where it didn't feel so bad. And I'm kind of laughing because it obviously did not work. But it's what I saw myself doing. And there was a lot of making myself wrong in this stage. I was doing a lot of judging how I was processing it all. I was feeling weak for not being able. And not really even being able. I was feeling weak for not feeling it all fully. I mean, I think if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know I'm a big advocate of feeling our feelings, right? Not avoiding or pushing them away or reacting to them, right? Like of actually processing them. And I wasn't doing a lot of that. I was actually doing a lot of numbing and what we would call surviving, kind of like the survival instincts where it's more freeze, flee, fight, that kind of stuff. And I wasn't being super kind with myself about this. And if I look back at my thoughts, what I was doing is I was trying to make this news very small in a way that I could allow my feelings to be very small. It was almost like I was trying to justify it all. Things that I would think was, oh, we've been through this before, so we got this. Or, oh, this tumor isn't as big, so it shouldn't be a big problem. And do you notice that language that I used there just now? It shouldn't be a big problem. And these thoughts actually weren't making me feel better. I was still very conflicted, would be a good word, about kind of where to land on this. Interestingly enough, a couple weeks after we found the news, we met with the doctors and our neurosurgeon and our neuro-oncologist, and they were kind of doing the same thing. They were kind of saying language like, this tumor isn't as big, it's not as significant as the first surgery, because the first surgery had a lot of impact neurologically, and they didn't expect that with this tumor. And their kind of way of being was like, this is no big deal. And we walked away from that meeting, my husband and I being like, that didn't feel right. Like that felt off. Like that, we like kind of were pushing back and resisting that concept because we're like, wait, this is a big deal. Like you're going to be doing brain surgery on our child. Like that's a big deal. And that was kind of the moment, I think, for me, or like the transition point where I was able to accept this is a big deal and not to kind of resist that. So kind of prior to that, I was kind of fighting against the idea that this was a big deal. It was almost like I was trying to make it go away by thinking it was small, which is not wrong. But to me, it just wasn't allowing me access to the grief and to kind of things that would have helped me more at that time. And so things that were really in my space as fears was obviously telling my kids. It's like, okay, I have this information that I know is going to hurt my child. And so it's almost like the idea of being forced to hurt your child. And that was a thing I was very afraid of and obviously very, very sad about. I was afraid of the financial impact. Tumor 1, we were in the hospital for 2 months. And so clearly that impacted my career, my husband's career, etc. And it drained our bank accounts. So like we went from doing, like we were very stable at that time to being then completely depleted and then jumped into a long recovery process, which I'm sure you all know is financially challenging as well. So I think in my space for the second time is, oh no, what's going to happen to us now? Another thing that was coming up was the obvious one, like, oh my gosh, like what else is going to be added to Levi's plate in terms of his health and his well-being? And I desperately didn't want him to have any other additions to his diagnoses. During this process, like this early process, as I'm digesting the information, the new diagnosis, telling our kids, preparing, I'm swinging almost daily, almost momentarily from feeling amazing, truly amazing. Like I was like, I got this. We totally got this, to feeling terrified. And like, we don't got this. This is really bad. And so there was just like so much all at once, a lot of resistance in my space, like of trying to make all of that go away. The way that I looked at my journal when I was preparing for this episode, and I had written that it felt like I was on a train and I was currently in this beautiful place with beautiful scenery. Yet I was going full steam ahead into this dark and gloomy cloud. And there was no stopping, slowing down, or getting off. And I was like, wow, that's a great visualization of what it felt like for me as my body was being pulled toward this dark cloud that was unknown, uncertain, and certainly uncomfortable. And ultimately, what we see in this early stage is my experience of lack of control and powerlessness. And so all of the things I was doing in these early phases were trying to compensate for that. It was trying to fix the problem of, this is scary, I'm going to fix it by trying to control it. However, I'm sure as I said that, you're like, well, but you can't, Kara. Like, that's not an option. Like, you cannot change this part. You can't change the circumstance. So you can see how it was an experience that kind of always left me hitting up against a big wall. I couldn't actually get to where I wanted to go through the efforts of control. So some of the things I did that I think are good illustrations of this kind of trying to attempt to have control was in how and when I told people about this new diagnosis. I noticed that I was really restricting actually telling people, because it was almost like I felt like, okay, if it's my secret, I control it. And something that I don't know why, but I feel very uncomfortable about how people respond to this information. And so I really wanted to control how other people even would respond to when they learned the news that Levi had another brain tumor. There's something about when you tell people that information, usually there's pretty big reaction, or even there's a sense when you watch somebody else experience it, they're like, oh, this is a big deal. And by watching other people kind of have that reaction, it was like I then had to be with the experience that like, ooh, maybe I'm missing something. Like they're reacting pretty big. Like, why am I so okay with this if like it's not their child, are like devastated. And so again, you can just see me kind of wrestling with like being really resistant to where I actually was and resistant to feeling the gravity of the impact of this news. So the experience I had was continuing to kind of be feeling a lot of powerlessness in, like, if you look at the situations, like not having control over my scheduling, not having control over the outcome, not having control of how my children responded and what they would need, not having control of really any of it. And I mean, even as I say this, I'm like, wow, that is a lot to be with. And so the single thought that brought me the most peace during this time was kind of recognizing, okay, yes, I am trying to control all these things that are not controllable. Like, that's clear to me. Nor will I ever be able to have control over those. But I do have control over who we will be for each other during this experience. So this was particularly helpful, like prior to telling Levi the news. Like I said earlier, it's like, oh my gosh, I have this like bomb to drop on my child. Like, this does not feel good. So when I connected to that, I don't have control over how it will hurt him, but I have 100% control over who I will be for him. In the sense that I will be his mom. I will be there for him every step of the way. I will build a team around him that will support him. And that to me was like, boom, I connected back to my power, my agency, knowing that like no one could get in my way to get him what he needed, and that I would be able to access anything I needed for him because I knew I would. I had that confidence in, I don't want to say myself, but in the capacity I have to show up for him. You probably hear it in the way I share the story, that's where I found my power back. And so that did not make the pain go away. Let's be clear about this. But it did give me access to my power again. Now, does that mean I didn't constantly try to control things? No, it did not. Like, that was my survival instinct kicking in to trying to protect me. And it did a fabulous job in a lot of ways. And through the episodes, I didn't actually do a great job of telling you. I'm going to do 3 episodes in kind of breaking this experience down. But in this part in particular, we're going to talk about the preparation in leading up to the surgery and kind of what I did to support myself and to support Levi, obviously, and how I kind of allowed my survival mechanism to be part of the ride. That survival mechanism is there and designed to protect me. It wasn't an all or nothing kind of thing. Typically, we don't want to live a life from survival. that would be kind of where we're overprotecting ourselves, and it doesn't allow us to have the experiences from what I would kind of call on the other side of the spectrum, our essence of kind of that most aliveness part of us. So survival mechanism, while it's so helpful, it, for me, like my survival mechanism, isn't a super enjoyable state to be in. It's not when I feel the best. However, it's a very useful tool. So the survival mechanism for me looks like control, a lot of control. And I see this in a lot of special needs moms. So I am not unique in this. And my guess is that you really can resonate with this part. So I allowed my survival mechanism to come along for the ride and kind of be my partner in this. But I also had moments where I was able to connect to what I wanted outside of my survival mechanism. Like, what would make this experience a little bit better? And I don't know if I would have used that language exactly, but I had a vision that I developed that really kind of asked the question, what would it look like for me to go through this experience so fully supported that the only thing I had to worry about or focus on was Levi and supporting him through the surgery? That like the level of community and structure that I had around me was like so extreme that it almost made this easy. I know it's kind of a lofty vision, and I felt silly at the time saying it, but it also gave me something to focus on, that felt like, okay, again, I can manage this. I can put my energy toward this. And so I would say it was a very productive use of my survival mechanism. And I think it's worth mentioning that I don't think there's a lot of models of moms that go into an experience like this fully supported. I think we see little bits and pieces, but I can't think of a mom that I was like, oh, she's my role model. I want to be like her. I want to do what she did. And I want to kind of change the narrative when it comes to experiencing something like this. And honestly, it's hard for me to say out loud and to kind of say, but I was like, I want to be that model for my community. I want to be the model for the Special Needs Mom podcast people of trying to change the narrative, doing it a little bit differently and in a way that offers us as moms a different experience. So I want to transition and tell you some actual things that I did in the preparation part to align with that vision of being so fully supported. One of the first communities I told was a group of coaches that are my colleagues, if you will. However, we are really only aligned as it comes to spirit. We have no necessarily corporate or financial ties. We are a community called Play Big Corporate Coaching. Yes, we do some projects together. However, coaching is actually a very individual sport. And we said we want to play together. We want to actually be in community with one another as coaches, supporting each other in one another's businesses, and obviously then getting to partner on projects together. And so it's a really unique group of people because we are only aligned by our commonality in coaches and being coaches. We're not aligned in really anything else in the sense of spirituality, age, gender, children, all the things. Like there's just a lot of diversity in the group, and it's a beautiful thing. And so this was the community, ironically, that was the front runner in providing the structure for my support team. I told them, I said, obviously I shared the news with them, and their first thing is, what do you need? Right? So this is a question that triggers a lot of us because you're like, I don't know what I need. The only thing I could come up with at that time was, what I want to do is I want to have a conversation really talking about how to structure this. Like I have this vision and I need help. And so what happened next is they set up a Zoom conversation. I think this might have been a specific request I had of saying, hey, let's set up a Zoom call. And so we can talk about it. So I can kind of share my vision. And then basically I can kind of like allow others in. I think one thing I came to during this time was, I don't have to do all of it by myself. I think first, like if I would have done this like 5 years ago, I would have done everything on my own. I would have not had anybody involved, and it probably wouldn't have gone very well. And it would have looked much different than it does today. So I had this conversation and I said, "Hey, Mary, will you lead the conversation? Like, I don't even want to lead this conversation." And so she took the reins, and really my only job in that conversation was sharing my vision, sharing my needs, being me. And interestingly enough, that me was showing up pretty scared, pretty controlling. It's actually really funny. I could see it happening in the moment that, like, as I was sharing stuff, I was trying to control how it was going to go. And I was watching it happen, but I was like too in it still to like do anything else. And so they were so gracious with me and just allowed it all to be totally okay. What we came away from that meeting was they assigned a project manager to manage the whole thing. We had, it wasn't really called a website developer, but somebody that was going to set up a carrying bridge and kind of manage that whole thing. We had somebody that was managing the coach of the week. So something that I had shared specifically was, hey, I want to have a coach that's kind of my coach for the week that I can call upon demand. And so when I needed somebody during this time, I would dial that coach and say, "Hey, this is where I'm stuck." Some weeks I would not have a need, and sometimes they would just like let me know that they're there, and sometimes I'd have a very clear and specific need, and they would really help me get some elevation on whatever thing I was kind of being confronted with or just upset about. The other thing I had come up with as part of my vision, and I was like, I think you guys are going to like this, because it kind of shows how extreme I went in my brain. I was like, I'm going to get Levi sponsors. Like, professional athletes, they get sponsors. They get companies to come alongside these kids, adults, whoever, and be like, yeah, we got you. We want you to represent us in this world. And so I was like, Levi should have a sponsor. And so I came up with a couple companies that I was like, they like definitely. And so I kind of cast this vision to, again, my team, my friends. And so instead of me having to go make the pitch and do this thing, they did it for me. Now, some of the sponsors didn't come through. That's totally fine. I was very unattached to it. So you can see the theme here is I don't have to do it all myself. And really that early on, I created a structure so that I was fully supported. Early on, I created a structure so that I was fully supported. So that before we got into the trenches, like which I'll call like the actual surgery and the hospitalization, I had this structure in place to where I had resources on how I could handle really anything that came. And another thing I forgot to mention is that part of this community was they said, hey, we want to actually step in and coach your clients, select a couple of them, coach your clients in your absence so that you can still get paid, your clients can still get served in this duration of time. It was a 2-month duration that we had done that for. And it's kind of unheard of. It's kind of like your colleague saying, oh, you know what? You can't come to work. I'll do all your work for you and then you'll still get paid. It's crazy. And so I feel like truly it is an inspiring community. And I think as I was preparing for this podcast, I was overcome with gratitude for what I was able to receive during this time. And so during this time, and even all the way through, but it started in this first phase, I really just allowed myself to focus on receiving, to directing, to kind of identifying a need and being able to then to go ask for it or even requesting somebody. And in this case, like if Mary was setting up my carrying bridge and you're really kind of saying, hey, can you do this? So really just focusing on listening for and distinguishing what I needed. So that was like the work I had to do. I didn't then have to single-handedly go create it. The other thing I really allowed myself to focus on was to prepare for being comfortable in the hospital. You know, because we have had many prior hospitalizations, I have a lot of points of reference for what it's like to live in the hospital. And so I went to town. I was like, I got a new pillow. I got this is funny. I shouldn't admit this, but I got a whole new set of makeup so that I could have like a set of makeup at the hospital and when at home so I didn't have to bring it back and forth. Now, it didn't work because like it just didn't work. But I attempted to do that and like, seriously, it's actually funny to consider how much energy I put into these kind of things. But here's the thing. They made me feel good. They made me feel like I had control, like I had something to do, and I was going to make this experience a little bit better for myself. So I think I said I got a ton of soft clothes, and I decided it was a good time to like refresh my underwear supply, and I got all sorts of new underwear and did all that. And new computer. I thought, if I'm going to live at the hospital, I got to have a new computer that like has a proper battery. So I did that. And really you can see like I went in. I thought, oh my gosh, I need healing oils for Levi. And so I got a diffuser and I got all these things so that I could try to attempt to make my baby feel more comfortable. Ironically, on the diffuser thing, after I had gotten everything for him, I realized, oh, his nose is going to be completely packed. Like I was thinking, oh, he's going to love to smell these oils. Like different, like fresh scents, because we'd be locked inside. And then like I realized, oh, okay, well, we're just going to go for the healing properties if he has them on his topically, or I guess they're going to be for my enjoyment. Okay, the other things I allow myself to do and just loved him all the way through was obsessively cleaning my house. That for me is like a very indicative of me feeling out of control in my life if I'm going to go kind of obsessively and nervously clean. And in this case, it was just like allowing myself to process that nervous energy. And honestly, I love the byproduct of it. I love that I got a clean and more organized house because that actually allowed, like, I feel better in an organized space. So it was kind of a win-win for me. Now, is it a long-term solution for anxiety? No, because all I would ever do is clean. But in this case, in this like little micro section, it was perfect. So that's going to wrap us up. That gets kind of us through the first phase, that phase of processing the diagnosis and preparing for surgery. And next week, rather than kind of just go through the whole process play by play, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the experience in 3 parts. What worked well, what didn't work, and what would I do differently? And so actually, this is an evaluation process I learned from another coach. It's fabulous. It's so simple. And it allows us to reflect, to offer kindness and compassion. But it also allows us to create some awareness on not just what we want to do differently, but even like how we might do that and who we would need to be to do that thing. So that's what we're going to do next week. And in our final episode is going to be a 3-part series. We're going to talk about the recovery phase. We're going to look at, okay, we like survived. We all lived through this experience. And I say that kind of funnily, but it's kind of not that funny. So we got through this experience and kind of looking at the aftershocks, the impact, and the recovery process. And again, I'm really focusing on the mother experience here. Yeah, I'm going to touch on some things for Levi as I support him. However, again, I'm really focusing on the experience of mom and mother during this process. So that's all we have for today. I haven't asked for a little bit, but now is a good time, now that we're done with the episode, to take just a second and go ahead and leave a rating and review of this podcast. If you listen either on Spotify or on Apple iTunes, you can leave this review. Now, what this does, this offers a better ability for other moms to find this podcast and to say, hey, that might be something that I want to give my valuable listening time to. And so if you want to help out a special needs mom, consider rating and reviewing and or sharing this episode with a special needs mom that you know that would love it. See you next week. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.